Supply Chain Talk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Supply Chain Talk. My name's Alistair Chariton, and this afternoon our topic is improving your supply chain with digitalization. Before I introduce my three guests, a quick reminder of the format as usual, which is that we'll first discuss a topical news item and then we'll move on to the main discussion topic. Your contributions as usual are also welcome in the Q&A and chat panel on your screens, so please do contribute and we'll try and pick up as many comments and questions as we can. And as every week, there is a Supply Chain Talk mug awarded to the contribution we value most, so look forward to seeing those. So let me introduce my guests, and firstly we have Sheldon Maidat, who's founder and CEO of SupplyChainTalk. And SupplyChainTalk is and Sheldon is a 25-year veteran of procurement and supply chain in the enterprise space. And he is also a supply chain relationship evangelist and speaker. And SupplyChainTalk is an AI-driven collaborative software as a service platform to optimize customer supplier ecosystems. So very relevant to what we're talking about today. My second guest is Oza Ergel, who is Group Head of Procurement and CPO at Aquila Capital. And Oza's got 28 years experience in procurement and supply chain, and he started in automotive at Toyota, and for the last 20 years has been in the energy businesses Alstom, LM Wind Power, ABB, and more recently Aquila Capital, where he leads the group's procurement function and supply chain sustainability workstream. And he's also chair of Solar Power Europe and has worked in many continents and cities. And it's worth mentioning that Aquila Capital invests in, initiates, develops and manages essential energy assets in wind, solar and hydro. So a very different perspective on the supply chain, I'm sure. My third guest is Tony Lancioni, who's supply chain and product lifecycle lead at Noble Gas Systems. Tony has 20 years experience in supply chain and sustainability, and he's worked in various industries, including automotive, mobility, consumer products and renewable energy. And at Noble Gas Systems, he is their product lifecycle lead. And just to say that Noble Gas Systems are a conformable tank manufacturer for compressed gases in the US. And Tony also teaches at supply chain operations management and contemporary logistics at nearby Madonna University, to where he lives in Detroit. So welcome, Tony. And finally, Peter Bolsdorf, who is Executive Vice President for Innovation and Business Intelligence at the Association for Supply Chain Management. So Peter oversees ACCM's innovation, governance and processes, as well as business intelligence for content, event programming, customer satisfaction and operational effectiveness. And he's also the author of a book, Supply Chain Excellence, a handbook for dramatic improvement using the SCORE model. So a very talented collection of guests. Welcome all four of you. And given all your experience and talents, took a while to read them all out, but delighted to have you here. So let's turn now to our topical article, which appeared in last week, I think 10 days ago, in The Economist magazine. And it's rather sort of whimsically titled The Barbie Paradox. But to me, it's been a really fantastic explanation of the pros and cons of global versus local supply chains. And as the article is subheaded, today's supply chains are neither global nor local, they're both. And it explains how Mattel, who make Barbie dolls, have got a real choice, and they deliberately choose two types of supply chain in a way, where for some products, they'll manufacture them closer to home in Mexico. And for example, that is the Barbie Dream House, which is 3 stories high, very bulky, very heavy, very expensive. And given it's such a costly product, difficult to predict its demand. And it tends to be very seasonal at Christmas. So for that reason, keep it close, manufacture it close to your marketplace in the US, in Mexico to serve the US. Whereas the Barbie doll, in the many varieties of the Barbie doll, is very small and therefore quite cheap to ship in bulk. And because I guess there's such a wide range and it's a more common product to buy, the demand is very predictable. So for that reason, they say let's put it as low cost as we can overseas, and the lead time and so on is not so problematic. And it talks about one or two other factors that you take into account as well. So I would recommend it. It's a very good article, The Barbie Paradox, and it's a great introduction to that sort of trade-off in the world we all live in, where offshoring, nearshoring, domestic production is a constant debate. So, sort of following that intro, perhaps turning first of all, Sheldon, to you, kind of, how do you see this balance playing out, and does it play out in what you and your clients are doing?
Thanks, Alistair, and thanks for having me as well. So, it's an interesting read, the Barbie piece. Going into COVID, there really wasn't very much balancing to speak of, to be honest with you, was there? It was very much a cost-driven exercise, just-in-time purchasing, etc., lowest cost country sourcing. It was all about that bottom line, and then obviously, in fact, it wasn't so much COVID as a 400-meter stretch of water, where 12% of the world's trade passed through. That was the real logjam, wasn't it? That was a bit of a wake-up call, besides COVID, and that really did. It took so long for that to clear out. There was no way that things could just remain the same as they were, and so that gave rise to what is now a very well documented. It's very well documented, the study of nearshoring, reshoring. Increasing resilience, and looking for a better way, or almost a just-in-case way of trading rather than a just-in-time way of trading. And you look at today's operations, where if we're focusing on global operations, you've got one country waking up, another territory going to sleep. You've got different service lines and product lines, languages, time zones. Distributed teams, remote functions, and that's just the customer. Now overlay the supplier ecosystem, and all of its interactions across that dynamic, and you've got something that's truly complex. It's a bit of a segue into a digital transformation discussion, but that aside for 1 minute, just in terms of how something so non-stop and dynamic can be resilient. You simply can't take a just-in-case or a just-in-time approach to optimizing those services, not in today's environment.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you, Sheldon. So you're very much, in summary, so saying we're going from the real cost-driven approach that maybe happened a few years back to now a lot more realistic about the risks of disruption and therefore what long supply chains can mean. Oza, turning to you, I mean, I guess in your supply chain, you may not have much choice about where things get manufactured, do you? But what's your take on it? You're still on mute, I think.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. Right, and when pendulums did swing to the China, right? I mean, my generation contributed a lot, right? And we invented this low-cost country sourcing. There was big advantage, not only cost-wise, but also environmental restrictions, right? I mean, things you cannot do in Europe or Western countries. We really didn't care. I mean, what's going on in the other side of the earth. So yeah, you're right. I mean, for our business, I mean, if you look at the dependencies of China, right? I mean, for silicon, rare earth elements, or the processing of lithium, is very concentrated in specific country, right? And in fact, the industry enjoyed this the last 20 years, right? The price was coming down gradually, autopilot. I mean, as procurement people, we didn't need to do anything, and because the learning curve and enabled that. I mean, China invested heavily in big capacities, and you cannot simply do it in Europe or US. Now all the benefit and risk and the going to offshore, when you turn the flow backwards, I mean, it will be negated, right? I mean, the cost will increase, right? I mean, risk will go down, right? And but at the same time, there's a balance. I mean, we had a kind of very typical exercise in automotive, right? I mean, item selection for globalization, and which items you need to look into. You can source from China or far distance, right? I mean, the intrinsic cost or logistic cost, or the ease of correction if something goes wrong, and then we could easily place those components. Okay, China in the beginning, or India, was very suitable for simple products, right? That the turning parts, or the lathe part, or the steel parts, and very low technology. But in 20 years or maybe more now, they're exactly in the producing something leading edge of technology, right? I mean, so reversing it is not that easy anymore, right? But I believe that this is not something we can avoid, right? I mean, there will be nearshoring, there will be local community support. Yeah, there will be price to pay, but I think this is a kind of globalization 2.0. It's a kind of, yeah, we should develop our local or regional supply chains, and this will also have impact on the inventory levels or logistics, the pipeline. But yeah, this will be new normal.
Yeah, you're right, and we mustn't forget. You're absolutely right. It does have an impact right the way down the line, including inventories. Tony, in your world, what are you seeing? Is globalization 2.0 the new way of looking at things?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to first, thank you very much for having me. But just what Sheldon and Ozer had said, and to kind of pile onto that, COVID woke us up to a lot of interesting, ups and downs, right? In a way, it was all really good because, it woke us up to stuff. But the key point from the article is, to highlight the strategy to nearshore isn't to isolate from China or whatever the media or geopolitical, politics want us to think. It's to shorten supply chains and to make them more resilient, to make them more agile, which is the buzzword now, right? And to be more responsive to customer, trends and demand and demographics and unforeseen changes and black swan events like COVID. So when that next one comes, we'll be more prepared, right? And there's always a risk, right, wherever your supply chains are. But the key is to spread that risk and not isolate it in a region. Again, going back to media and politics, we've got a bad. China especially had gotten a bad rap. And the thing is we did that to ourselves, as everybody had mentioned on this, right? We did that, because it made sense. And it's not as simple as overnight pulling out and relocating or nearshoring, right? It takes decades. It takes decades to do it properly. And that's transitioning, going into what we're going to talk about today, how important systems are, and digital transformations and collaboration amongst platforms and suppliers, and looking at suppliers as more partners and not just supplying product, right? That's how we're going to get through it on that next one. And that's how we have to become, how we have to move forward as global supply chains.
Yeah, no, that's a nice introduction to our main topic. But before we move to the main topic, Peter, you've been waiting patiently. What would you like to add to that discussion?
Sure. First, Alistair, thanks for having me. So the Association for Supply Chain Management, we've got over 200, I'll call it, corporate entities in that Global 2000 space. So my perspective is going to come from our top 10. And what we've launched in the last year, a new process model called the SCORE Digital Standard. And essentially, SCORE in the new way is really two infinity loops. And this idea around how do we orchestrate two perpendicular infinity loops. One is how to bidirectionally orchestrate demand and supply. And so it's not just, hey, forecast this, and then this is what we're going to get shipped. And I think the other thing that this article represents is the other vertical dimension is how do I orchestrate the synchronization of a regenerative supply chain? And so it's not just about service and economics anymore. It's also about sustainability, both social and otherwise. And so I think the article is a great representation on how organizations are really thinking about nonlinear supply chains and this ecosystem that's constantly in motion. And then how do I deal with that? And so again, that's how I would comment on the Barbie article.
Thank you. That's
and noting that I also have two granddaughters that are 5 and 8, so this is a real supply chain issue, and I am now a hero because I can actually source the and I've actually put a visual on the house that was made in Mexico, by the way. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that's a really good point you add there, which is actually how sustainability is now coming into things. And I know in a week or two's time we're talking about that on Supply Chain Talk. But it does change that balance, because it's not just financial cost, it's CO2 cost, and suddenly that can tip the balance even more to nearshoring versus offshoring. So thank you. Those are all really interesting comments. Let's move then to the main topic, which is about improving your supply chain with digitalization. And the first point we got to talk about here is building a collaborative relationship with suppliers, adapting and implementing a digitalization plan. And actually, in last week's episode, the panelists were all talking about supplier relationships and really saying how important it was these days to work collaboratively, which I think is just what you Peter and Tony were just saying, rather than the rather traditional sort of confrontational kind of approach of just give me the stuff at the cheapest cost and I don't care about anything else. So back to you, Sheldon. What are your thoughts? I mean, is the collaboration, is the relationship the thing to focus on rather than data and processes?
Both. I've made a business out of and a career out of driving better relationships in supply chain, to be honest with you. I spent years working with organizations in the enterprise space, and there wasn't really any tech to do what we did. So it was all about using spreadsheets and PowerPoints and creating these funky formulas to emulate subjective type behavior, turning it into something objective that we could then kind of manage and measure. And then the tech came along, which we were a part of, obviously. But yeah, it's a very, very important area. And you look at the need for more resilience and any different factors that feed into better resilience, whether it be people buying with purpose, down in the customer end of the supply chain, and that information being the information that they use to make the decisions is predicated upon stuff that's happening in the supply chain in terms of responsible sourcing, et cetera, et cetera. That's also part of a supply chain being more resilient, to its customers. This all depends on information that flows for a start. And as I said before, if we look at the different types of, the non-stop dynamic of the supply chain, you can't manage something like that in today's environment without technology for a start. So yes, it is about the systemic integration of data. Absolutely, of course it is. It's also about the cooperation of the logistical functions across those operations, 100%, but also 100%. And in my view, extremely important. Digital transformation fails not because of systemic data integration, not because of logistical function cooperation across an operation. It fails because of issues that are faced within the relationship layer, where the people are, whether it be alignment and alignment or a culture fit, or all these different things that happen in the people layer, in the relationship layer, in the unstructured data layer. And that's where we live, to actually draw, and that's about relationships, not just externally across your supply chain, obviously bearing in mind that 80% of a company's revenue exists outside its borders in its supply chain. So very, very important to have those relationships. But yeah, it's 100%. It's absolutely critical.
Thank you. Oza, what are your thoughts on that? How best to build that collaborative relationship?
Yeah, we need to understand why we need to collaborate, right? I mean, supply chains are becoming very complex, very ambiguous, right? So because they are, and their problems are cross-cultural, right? I mean, you cannot simply solve this a kind of unilateral approach, right? And this is my checklist here, go and comply with this, right? It requires a kind of joint problem solving only possible with the collaboration, and collaboration only possible with the trust. And trust is based on transparency. And I think the value chain's visibility will be the ultimate the enabler going forward, right? So it is not about okay, where is the polysilicon coming from in my solar panel, right? There is no behavioral visibility there. So due to different reasons, and the suppliers are reluctant to disclose this information, right? What is the solution, right? I mean, you can have your audit. I mean, you try to go there and audit. This is not working. In the end, you are going into kind of blockchain technology, right? I mean, so that you can understand. In fact, I'm doing this very primitively, right? I'm asking people, where do you get your polysilicon, and summing this up very primitive. You can have an idea, but if the parties are not collaborating and they're transparently, and the digitalization will be a solution, right? It's one of the solutions, right? And but I think this is the ultimate goal. But we believe that the value chain partners should cooperate. That's why if you look at the Solar Power Europe example, and we created a kind of multi-stakeholder initiative, right? And not the buyers defining the rules, but all the buyers, all the value chain players coming together and disclosing the issues and trying to find a solution, transparent. I think if you reach at this level, right? I mean, this will requires lots of information exchange, okay? Because the audit results or the scoring results will be shared with all the stakeholders in the industry, so it will be visible, right? And so another key, I think, enabler, standardization of the information packages, right? Because everybody developing their own standards, and this creates also kind of fatigue with the suppliers or the buyers. And I think to achieve a kind of full transparency in a short time, right? I mean that there's a need for a kind of working with a limited number of standardization.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because it's been, yeah, it depends on who's got the upper hand, but absolutely it's sort of, you'll have, thinking of the US examples and Barbie, you'll have Walmart insisting on a certain standard, you'll have Toys R Us saying no, we want this standard, and as I say, for a big supplier they can cope with it, but for a medium or smaller supplier, very, very difficult. Tony, do you set huge standards on your suppliers for data, and is that a problem that you're seeing of everyone having different ways they want to exchange information and different information they want to exchange?
Yeah, absolutely. And to Ozer's good point, it makes transparency hard. I mean, what it comes down to, it's almost like this three-pronged approach, and it starts with your mindset, it goes into transparency, and then it's the digital collaboration, right? And to go back to the mindset, I stress to anybody I'm working with or any students that I'm teaching that supply partner versus the supplier mindset. For so long, it's been that, like you'd mentioned, Alistair, that beat down mentality. And again, something that COVID shaped us into. And even before that, but COVID, left a lot of suppliers hurt. Even after the 2009, 2008 economic downturn as well, a lot of people went under, but COVID then did that again to us. But then it put us into pain points with materials. It put us into pain points with all sorts of supply chains, to where larger OEMs and larger companies couldn't beat down because they didn't have a stick to beat with. And they had to jump on calls. They had to get in their tiers, office rooms and virtual office rooms to get on the same calls with these suppliers to say, look, we're going to work together in order to make this happen. And then, what else happens? Their understanding of what's going on, and that the supply partner's not, giving them the runaround and saying, hey, we're raising costs because our suppliers are doing that. They know what's going on from the get-go, right? So that's that transparency. You're bringing along the supply partner and the OEMs with you. And that gives you ultimate accountability as well. And then to put that into the digital space of actually being able to collaborate. And, as Ozer mentioned, with the visibility of what's going on, because your issues aren't surface level. A lot of times they're at the tier 3s and 4s below you that you can't see. But that transparency, again, that you have with your other tiers, and there's a lot of reluctance around it. We understand it because margins are baked in all along, right? But there's got to be that coming out of the beginning at contract level saying, look, we understand your margins. We know where you have to be. We want you to be profitable as well, because we don't want a dying supply partner how do we do this, but then demand that ultimate accountability, that transparency through the process?
Yeah, those are great points about how that transparency really does apply in practice. And Peter, just before we move to you, there's an interesting sort of a provocative little comment from Sylvester in the chat here, saying that if COVID woke us up, was it because we were asleep? Do you think that's fair? Do you think the world of supply chain was asleep? I mean, Oza was saying, hey, life was pretty easy, costs kept on falling, kind of, we didn't have to work too hard. Maybe there's some truth there. What do you reckon, Peter?
I think there's two parts to that one. I think there are those companies who are visionary anyway. So let's just say it's 25% of those leaders are always thinking about what's next. I mean, so they've moved on from this operational resilience to strategic resilience. How do I better update my playbook so that I can deal with these things? I think there's this middle group. The rest, let's call them laggards. I think they've buried their heads in the sand. And I think there's this emerging middle group that are laggards that now are waking up and smelling the pandemic, right? They're saying, holy buckets, I've got to get moving. And they're not going to catch up, but at least they're not going to, waste away, with their heads in the sand. Yeah. A couple of other comments I just wanted to make, Alistair. So when we're thinking, rather than a supplier customer relationship, we're really thinking about the ecosystem. And again, I think Tony had said it, it's not just tier 1 and tier 2, it's all the way back. Again, when you think about cybersecurity risk, it's not going to happen with your biggest suppliers next to you. It's going to happen down the road a ways, right? So, and then the second thing is there are market factors and collaboration and digitization, transparency issues that affect everybody in the ecosystem. It's not just like it affects one person. And so what we're seeing is this ecosystem captain kind of role. So with the bigger companies who can invest in the digital technologies that can actually see end-to-end, or at least approach to that one, how do you start to share and collaborate that so that everybody doesn't have to invest in technology that they may or may not use and that may or may not connect? So I just thought I'd add that spin.
No, thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That ecosystem, again, we often think about just our primary suppliers who are likely to be a lot more sophisticated than
Can I just come in very quickly on that, Alistair? So
do.
Really interesting points from Tony and Peter. And in fact, we engage more and more with organizations and who kind of raise on detra it is to become their suppliers, to be the customer of choice, essentially. They're looking to kind of explore together collaboratively with their suppliers, the top line, rather than focusing on the bottom line. And that's an ecosystem-wide thing. So it's not just their tier ones, as you rightly say. We're looking 2, 3, 4 tiers deep into the supply chain, and a lot of those. And the further you go along the supply chain, the smaller the companies typically become, and those smaller companies, especially now with so much going on with the cost of living crisis, they're struggling to pay the bills, let alone trying to meet certain standards, et cetera, all the additional legislation that's coming through. These guys want to collaborate. They want to be brought in. It's all part of driving this customer of choice environment. Where you bring your suppliers in to collaborate, to explore together. And it's more and more and more. It's an existential thing now. It really is. It's not a nice to have. It's really not a nice to have. And when you got supply in high demand, you just look at the ongoing crisis with semiconductors, for example. We've all used that example pretty well. But the fact is, if you are one of the relatively few organizations that provide that equipment, those electrical semiconductors to your customers, and if you want to be at the front of the queue, then you need to collaborate and drive the right kind of relationship. Because if you're not going to, then they're going to sell that stuff to someone else.
Yeah,
that's the way it works now.
No, very true. Thank you, Sheldon. Let's move to our second point, and we've been sort of, I guess, focusing more on sort of perhaps the manufacturers and so on, and like in the Mattel Barbie example, manufacturing goods. But the second point is ensuring your third-party logistics are integrated effectively with your supply chain digital strategy. So perhaps if we move on, Oza, to you, because I guess some of the equipment you're moving around is like really pretty mega machinery and plant that you're having to move around. So kind of our third-party logistics, does that tend to be an afterthought, or is that absolutely intrinsic to that whole sort of digital and supplier ecosystem?
I think it is very relevant, right? I mean, especially like us, if you are in the project business and the project completion linked to a kind of liquidated damages, etc., it's very critical. I mean, it's back to a kind of power purchase agreement. So that's why we would like to know where is our equipment, right? I mean, what is the date of arrival projections, and if something goes wrong, what is the alternative scenarios, right? If Suez Canal is blocked, can we go around the Cape, and this kind of thing? It's very relevant that working with the third party, and there is a kind of full digital control tower, so that we have all the visibility, all the options, and all the documentation management. There are lots of inefficiencies, as you know, the logistics, the information flow. I think this digitalization will be a major enabler. For instance, if I give you an example, we can simply define our project site as with a geofence, right? I mean, saying that 100 kilometers away from the project, when we see that a container coming in, crossing this geofence, we are getting notification. And this is circulated with the project team. They understand. They don't need to ask every time supply chain teams, where is my the panel? Where is my the battery pack, right? And that's why I think the third-party logistics and I expect more of, say, detailed or kind of effective control towers with the third-party logistics. I see that there is a progress, but I think they should develop a kind of customer-specific solutions. I mean, energy business, going forward, like I think it will be key for the next couple of decades at least. And there are still some challenges we have. We don't have full solution. I think there's a room for improvement for the digital arm of this third-party logistics solutions.
Thank you, Tony. What are your thoughts on your logistics partners and how they fit into this digital kind of supply chain?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I still think, and I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but whenever I tell anybody that I'm in supply chain, they automatically think that I move trucks. And yes, that is part of the supply chain, but definitely not all. And logistics has been around in transportation forever, right? It's evolved so much. And one of the classes I teach, which is contemporary logistics, is how it's evolved. Okay, so now we have these third parties and there's 4 PLs out there as well, and it's a different mindset. But outsourcing of logistics is the number one outsourcing expense for companies, right? So if they're going to outsource, it's usually the logistics, and it's because it needs so much attention. But it also needs to be an extension of your brand, because even though another company or a third party is moving your freight or warehousing or inventorying, the customer on the other end views it as you and your company. So they have to culturally match. They have to effectively fit into your supply chain, or else it will fail. And the first expense that will go, it will be that third party, and it will then, go out for another bid or be internalized or whatever. And then another piece of that is this digital part of it, right? And large companies like C.H. Robinson's of the world and stuff like that, they have all these different boards and dashboards you can go on to communicate a lot better. But there is a huge gap in tracking of freight and being able to monitor real time where your product is. You can get a good idea now with some of the technologies that are coming out, like it's in the Indian Ocean and it's there's a tsunami coming or whatever. There's that kind of technology, and it's getting better, but it's still really, really difficult to track. And I think we have a lot of room for improvement on that end.
Yeah, and also it's another example. Moving over to you now, Peter. It's another example where I guess there's so many different technologies, and if you use one global logistics provider, which of course the global companies love you to do, then life can be simpler. But if you actually use quite a lot of different regional specialists, or you've got specialist cargoes that you need shipping, then again you're into lots of different standards. Peter, your thoughts on the logistics partners?
Yeah, when we think about digital capabilities of the logistics, there's kind of three big buckets. One is companies need to lean on that community to really understand automation within, the four walls of a warehouse. And again, when you think about the level of investment on robots and robotics and all of those kinds of things. So I think there's one. I think the second one, to Tony's point, is, and Ozer's point, is how do I continue this evolution down to real-time tracking of goods and services across the world? And I think, technology is being employed there. There's a third one, though, I want to point out, and that's this, I'm going to call it the 3PRL. And so this idea around how do I bring it back? And when you look at the amount of effort of moving it forward, and again, all of the focus is there, there's a huge opportunity to how do I smartly be able to represent capacity to bring things back, as opposed to bringing it back empty. And I think as, organizations are really thinking about how do I, optimize and start to achieve my ESG commitments, globally, I think that's going to play into a factor. And again, I think that is grossly under mature. I think there's a lot of opportunity for, I'll call it the ecosystem as a total to really think about that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And again, COVID suddenly is true because it's through supply chain trade routes and the main shipping routes so out of balance. Suddenly, there weren't the empty containers heading back, which could take all our cardboard back to China for recycling. And just one example. So you're absolutely right. Sheldon, we didn't sort of get around to asking you this question about where the third-party logistics companies fit into to this. So anything you wanted to add there?
Well, I think by default they play a very big role for most companies. Most logistics is to a large degree outsourced, whether it be shipping, trucking, even the different elements of the way a company deals with its warehouse management or its yard management. There are a number of companies that are vertically integrating to take more control. But I'd also say that conversations that we've had with different logistics companies, they operate the different stages of their functions to a certain playbook. They have a way of doing things, and they manage the steps in line with a playbook, expecting that if they follow that playbook, this is what they will get at the end of it in terms of the level of service, etc. And the conversations we've been having are leading us to think that there is an additional requirement for a more real-time parallel running playbook. It's almost, you've got the playbook, this is the way that they operate, and then you've got this reactive playbook. It's almost the weights and measures that runs alongside. So this is, rather than just going from A to Z, this is what we're going to get as we follow the steps. We're actually going to sense check and temperature check everything we're doing along the way, which is going to enable us to course correct as we go. So instead of expecting to end up here, we may end up over here, but we've seen that journey happening because we've been running these checks alongside our standard playbook.
No, absolutely. So it is back to that transparency and visibility and being able to plan and react. Yeah. No, thank you. Well, let's move on to our third point, because with such a sort of comprehensive answers, we're almost running out of time. And that's really saying, where can effective supply chain platforms boost communication, collaboration, and innovation across your organization? So I guess in a way, there's two questions there, and feel free to answer either of them, which is, are there particular areas where that sort of supply chain platform can really help? Or indeed, the question, is the supply chain platform essential nowadays, or can you still have kind of individual ways of communicating with your suppliers? So Oza, to you first on that one.
Sure. Definitely, there will be a more need for a kind of collaboration platform, not because of digitalization sake, but also changing the demographic of the generations, right? My Generation X, I mean, we started with computer, right? I mean, and now the next generation, completely different way of working, and they like to collaborate. They like to use the online tools, online platforms, social media. So I think this is the way forward, right? And the especially supply chain, as we are touching all the functions, like from finance to engineering, from construction to the legal. So there's the supply chain becoming a kind of centerpiece of collaboration, right? And because things are getting physical with the supply chain step, right? And everything else is planning. And then I believe that, and the for internal collaboration, definitely. I mean, each company, if you are in the project business, and the project management platforms are key, and the with collaboration feature, and the for external collaboration with suppliers, and the especially bringing the buyers and sellers into same platform is a kind of marketplace. I think this will be a increasing importance, right? And the because the supply chains will be going local. I mean, there will be the distance between suppliers and customers maybe for some categories will be getting less, but some will be more, right? If you look at the East Asia, I mean, so demand, I mean, 50% of the global demand will be there, I mean, going forward, right? And so yeah, I mean, collaboration, and we also see that innovation and the moving from more from hardware innovation to the a kind of the innovation in the way you are doing things, right? In terms of collaboration, and also innovation, we believe that going forward will be innovation for sustainability, not for a kind of efficiency or low cost, but it will be for sustainability. What will be the effect of the sourcing decisions on the ESG criteria rather than pure cost? I mean, KPIs are changing in supply chain. In the my generation will be working with the cost quality delivery, blah, blah, blah. Now it will be ESG going forward, right? And the it will not be a kind of black and white shift, but there will be more importance. That's why collaboration platforms are important.
Yeah, thank you, Osa. Tony, what are your thoughts on where those big opportunities in terms of communication, collaboration, or innovation, and do platforms have is that the key enabler to make those things happen?
Yeah, absolutely. The answer is yes. I'm someone who strives to put everything in some kind of automated process, even if it's collaborating internally via Microsoft Teams or a Slack, that can then turn into a work ticket that can then move to go down the line on something else. Now, the key there is that you're not manually doing it every time, and there's an automation piece in it, and that there's transparency and historical log of where basically the request started all the way to your inventory in the back shelf, right? It's key though, in order to utilize platforms and to utilize tools, that before you do that, the people are on board, the correct training is there, or the processes are written out and workflowed before you even put it into a system, because then you just have a shiny tool that is doing the same thing as your manual processes before, right? So that whole part of this transformation into a collaborative platform is key. And then as you get on more and more automation platforms and get into AI and all that stuff, which I won't get into because that's a whole topic for itself, right? With forecasting and all of that, you do have to be cognizant of the cybersecurity, and all of that, just because you are putting more into the cloud and putting more on platforms. So.
Thank you. And then interesting, as you say, I mean, everyone, we all work collaboratively on platforms, kind of which even 5 years ago, how many people really use Slack, Teams, whatever, just a few years ago, and it's now just kind of the exception. Almost it would be not to use any of those tools in your work. Peter, what are you and your members seeing in terms of platforms and collaborative kind of tools working? Yeah.
Interestingly, Alistair, we see that people are only using generally 30% of the system functionality that they bought 5 years ago. And when you think about digitization, there's this getting from 30 to 80, just based on, as Tony just described, focusing on people and process. How do I take a process standard and then make sure that the process is organized according to the functionality of the tool that you're using, as opposed to saying, hey, this is how I've done it in the last 10, 15 years, and now I got to engineer the tool to do that. And then you just kind of cut yourself off at the knees. So I think what we're observing is the first step in digitization is really figuring out what processes, how do I use process standards to innovate from that separate. The other thing is, how do I then define those precious few digital capabilities that are really going to achieve our competitive advantage? Is it how do I connect with customers, smart operations, dynamic fulfillment, synchronized planning, product development, intelligent supply? So what are those capabilities that are really going to fuel competitive advantage? That would be my insights on that one.
Great, thank you. And finally, Sheldon, I guess as a provider of a platform, you'll be pretty keen on them. But how do they really add that value? If you could give us an example, that'd be great.
Many ways. So having a collaborative platform is creating equitable access for the customer and the supplier for a start. Okay, so more and more organizations are resource constrained. They want to create an equitable place for their suppliers and partners to come in to take ownership of some of this activity, to free up some of the time, the laborious activity in doing some of the management of these engagements. So it's creating this shared space for a start. It's also creating, ensuring something is easily adoptable as well. It's not about putting spreadsheets online. Nobody wants more spreadsheets. They've already got spreadsheets. So something that's aesthetically pleasing for a start and functional, easy to get into, easy to use, nothing that's hard and that requires rocket science, to be honest with you. And some of these engagements require heavy lifting, and some of them don't. Sometimes it's just the case of creating the access, the equitable access for your partners. That sometimes does enough to create the value, because you're giving that access to your suppliers, you're giving them ownership. And that's about trust. Trust is the kind of universal currency of any of these engagements. And the more trust you have, the more currency is worth. The more your currency is worth. Yeah. So that the value comes in all shapes and sizes. It really does.
Yeah. No, I think that's an interesting thought, and I guess it's also a reminder. I mean, I think Peter, you were saying that a lot of people only use 30% of the functionality that's there. But at least they're using something, and it doesn't have to start with everything. I mean, I can remember almost 20 years ago now when I was first in a company which had an extranet and suppliers could get sales data by retail store, and that was amazing. And suddenly it opened the floodgates of insight and knowledge and so on. So it doesn't have to start with everything. So we're almost out of time, but I think maybe just a very, very quick run around. One piece of advice to people looking at supply chain digitalization and working with suppliers, but really quick. Oza, if you can go first, one piece of advice.
Yeah, I believe that they should start with the blueprint, right? I mean, to understand really what is the value to company, then digitize it, right? Digitalization, right? There are lots of low-hanging fruits in the procurement environment. I mean, e-tendering and the document management and the supply rating. I think these are the change in the life for all the procurement people, and also the adding value to the company.
Thank you very much, Tony. Your very brief recommendation suggestion.
Yeah, similar to Ozar, focus on the people, focus on the processes, create the blueprint. Look at your collaborators or your stakeholders, like your suppliers, as partners, and re-architecting and architecting a platform to suit your needs will be the easy part. So focus on the people, the processes, the front end.
Great. Front end first. Thank you. Peter?
Process standardization breeds innovation. And our scor.ascm.org is open access. So for the ecosystem.
That's an interesting thought, that standardizing doesn't necessarily mean everyone's doing things the same way. Just by doing that, you recognize where you can improve. Thank you. Sheldon, finally from you, briefly.
Yes, it's about people, it's about process, it's about the relationship layer, as I've said. But the difference is the companies that haven't been doing it, that need to do it, is to treat the relationship layer as an unstructured data layer, to create an infrastructure. That way you can take that process and you can innovate with it and you can drive growth through it. That's the missing link.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time now. So to wrap up, thank you for those great insights and so many topics we touched on. I mean, there's too many to even recap, but we did touch on many topics, some of which I think we are discussing in future episodes. Because we had such a discussion, I'm afraid I wasn't really able to address many of the comments, which I saw there were lots of comments flowing. So I will just pick out one person to get the mug. And Sylvester, I know you you created a little bit of debate among ourselves, and I think it created a huge debate among yourself and some of the other audience. So well done doing that. So a Supply Chain Talk mug will be on its way to you. Our next episode is the same time next week, on Wednesday, the 12th of April at 4 p.m. UK time. And the subject there is making the most of data for supply chain sustainability reporting. And of course, we did touch on supply chain sustainability today. So that'll be another interesting topic. So finally, thank you again to my guests, Sheldon Maidat, founder and CEO of Sopico, Oza Ergel, Group Head of Procurement at Aquila Capital, Tony Lancioni, Supply Chain and Product Lifecycle Lead at Noble Gas Systems, and finally, Peter Bolsdorf, Executive Vice President at the Association for Supply Chain Management. So thank you, all four of you, for joining. Thank you, audience, for joining us as well, and look forward to seeing you next week. Goodbye.